All right, I'm showing 6:05 Mountain Time on my clock here, and we will go ahead and get started with our working session today, which is actually a review of our general plan and kind of where things are at. So we have a lot of other people joining us. This is being recorded. This is also being transmitted via YouTube Live. But at this point, because we have 1 hour before our general session starts tonight, we will turn it right over to, I believe this is Mark, with Landmark to guide us through where things are at right now. And you're on mute, Mark.
I was just asking if you hear me. So do you hear me now?
Yeah. Sounds good.
Okay, great. I'm going to, if it's okay, just a little bit of introductions. I'm Mark Vlasic with Landmark Design. This project has been directed by Lisa Benson, and she's out of town this week, so I'm filling in for her this evening. What I'd like to do is provide a presentation. Shouldn't take more than 15 minutes or so. That gives a summary of the plan. I assume that everybody has read it and is familiar with it. And then I think at that stage that we can kind of open it up for discussions and pretty much however you want to go with it. I'm sure that you have some specific questions and maybe some comments and changes that you would like to see. So with that, I'm going to share my screen and present the PowerPoint. Okay, does everybody see this? I don't hear anybody. Do you hear me?
Yes, so we can see it.
Okay, great.
There's Mark. This is Jake. Can you hear
Hi,
me?
Jake. How you doing? I thought I saw you there. So, okay. So, just wanted to start off. I'm sure we're all aware, but a general plan is sort of the primary tool that you have for planning for the future. The key thing that it does is establishes a vision and then builds upon that vision for directing growth and development and just the progress of your community in the future. It's a long-term document, meaning that it's meant to provide direction for the next 10 years and up to 20 years for very long-term ideas. But the rate that everything's moving these days with there's just a lot of development pressure that we're finding that these plans tend to need to be updated much more frequently than they did in the past. Quick summary of our public engagement. We've been working on this for going on a year and a half now. The beginning of this project took place during COVID, so the bulk of the input was through a website and having some online public engagement meetings, scoping meetings, and focus groups and other participation in that way. There was a community survey that was conducted by Y2 Analytics that provided some very good direction and sort of gave us a sense of what the public was feeling as far as a big picture for both the city and the county. For you that aren't aware, Landmark prepared both the county plan and the city plan for Morgan City at the same time. It was the way that we entered this project. So we're concurrently doing a general plan for Morgan County. As part of the plan, one of the things that emerged from that input was some sort of guiding principles to lead the formatting of the plan itself. The key things here was, what the community character was very important to the public, the sense of a small Western town. That was something that's coveted, that people really want to preserve. the agricultural identity, protecting agriculture for its value. That's particularly along the edges of the community, but all around the county, as well as within Morgan itself. Protecting the environment and natural resources. Smart growth, a lot of concern about development that if development does take place, that it represents the best of what it can be. And so that there was a lot of discussion what smart growth principles might apply in Morgan. Community services and amenities as the only real area in the county. Well, there's some exceptions to, towards Mountain Green, but the bulk of services, of sort of urban services, are provided here. And so the idea of utilizing that in a way that's it's using it in the best possible manner, but also that be concerned about maintaining as low of taxes as possible, while at the same time accommodating growth and the right kind of growth with that infrastructure. Transportation, we had on the team, Farron Piers, transportation consultants. One of the key things there was about improving safety and the connection between the different roadways through the community. Housing was a lot of discussion about, this is the big topic statewide, and particularly here in the Wasatch Front. We all know that housing, there's unprecedented growth and demand. At the same time, it's becoming less and less affordable. And how that translates to the Morgan situation was something that was of a great discussion during the production of this plan. And the same with economic development, that this idea of creating as we're calling here, a two-pronged approach to an economic development, that first to serve the local residents and the people working here, and then catch on to the growing tourism market as a way of bringing additional funding into the city. Parks and Rec, this bringing a sort of linking a good system of parks, trails, recreation together over the long term. People move here or have lived here because of the lifestyle, and it's something that is there's great demand and request that it become more and more part of the community in the future. A little bit of background: in the past, you haven't been growing very fast, and it's actually quite slow. And what's projected for the future is going to, it'll depend actually on a lot of it on this plan and what is adopted here, but that it will be potentially growing faster in the future. You're at a very much smaller rate than both the county and the state for the last 10 years. And in the future, it is anticipated to grow significantly higher. That then translated into the land use section of the plan, which this is a copy of your future land use map. And the things that we'd like to highlight are what are different on this map than previous versions of your general plan map. And those are these new categories that sort of are fine-tuning the vision for the future. Again, we're using that word vision. The low density residential in the context of today is from about 2 to 5 units per acre. That's, as you can see back on the map, is those light yellow areas along the edges of the community. We then have the medium density residential, which is obviously a significantly higher density, 6 to 15 units per acre. The images here show examples of what that could or might look like. And you could see again that this is primarily in between those light yellow areas on the edges and the core of the town. Sorry. We then have this mixed use area, the greater downtown mixed use area. Again, has similar densities as the median density, but it's also allowing a mix of retail, commercial, and housing to be together. And as you can see on this map, again, that it's a big portion of the sort of area between the freeway and the medium density area. So sort of that, what's right now is a mix of sort of light industrial type uses and retail and even some housing area in there. And the idea would be that that would be some uses that would bring sort of a extension of the downtown to the areas beyond it and become sort of the economic and living core of the city. And then as part of that is the river-oriented commercial and recreation. And you can see where that's located on the map here in the pink on the far east side of the community. It's related to this recreation and event district, which is on, again, in that general area. We also have these overlay areas that are on top of the base colors of the land use, or focusing on different aspects of the community. A proposed historic district in the core, this area that's sort of got a special use or a special function, which is to link the civic areas of the schools and the city center to the downtown district itself. And then a boulevard to sort of connect that, and boulevard treatments in the core of the greater downtown mixed use area as creating a good first impression and a walkable type of community in that core area. And then you have your civic district highlighted in the blue dashes where the school and city hall and such uses are located. And then again, the overlay of the recreation and event district. We also indicate these major entrances into the city where special action should be taken to improve and really acknowledge the fact these are the points that people where they come and go, and they should really be a point of clarity of how to proceed, especially for people that haven't been to Morgan before. And these are some images of those, sort of what we're talking about in those overlay districts of the civic district all the way down to the historic district. So those are the key principles in land use. We then sort of think about what strategies might be used to help us achieve that vision. And the first is to really, this is sort of almost more of a, well, you could do it on the micro level here in Morgan with the focus of growth in centers, but it's also within the county itself that Morgan is the key center for the county, and that growth would be concentrated here as well as in areas such as Mountain Green. So from a countywide perspective, that would be the bulk of all the sort of more intensive and urban, I guess for the lack of a better word, urban type development versus more rural and county type development. Land preservation, as was mentioned, was a really important thing that came out of the planning effort. So application of various land preservation tools would be important in the future. We've identified a number of them in the plan. We're not recommending that one be used over the other, although there's probably some that have more applicability, but it's more of a toolbox for the future as you're moving down the road to consider some of those tools to help you achieve your goals. Also to implement programs and ordinances, this with a special focus on protecting agriculture. And there's again a sort of a discussion about that in the plan. Utilizing tax credits and exemptions to preserve green space and open space. Establishing economic partnerships. There's already some of that starting to happen in the area, and that would be something to build upon in the future as part of achieving the overall vision, especially your economic vision of this two-pronged system of meeting the needs of local people as well as benefiting from the potential growth of economics from tourism. These special districts that we just talked about, establish them and over time really have them become the kinds of places that you want, and then protect those areas and tie it in with encouraging agriculture in the long run, and then fostering education and innovation. You have a civic district that's sort of grounded by the high school and other sort of potential educational institutions, building upon that both in the city and then linking with partners in the county and elsewhere would be a way of moving forward to show that you're a community on the rise, not just on the rise, that's the wrong term, that you're a community that's really moving forward with the changes that are happening. Community character ideas. We did talk about historic preservation. That's quite a process unto itself, but it's something that tends to be well worth it. Again, particularly for a community where you understand what a unique sense of place that you have, as we say, that you know who you are, and you want to preserve that for future generations, for your children and grandchildren. Improving your streetscapes and your gateways that we talked about, those boulevard ideas are ways to enhance the character of your community and build upon your history. Providing good buffers between land uses and transitions between them, not having strict boundaries between them so that one doesn't match the other. That's something that's an art to good land use planning, and it's something that we think that would really be serve you well in Morgan as you move forward. Providing public access within private development. This is particular with the idea of linking the community with a series of trails. The bulk of your land is private, and there's not that much public trails at the moment or public land for park development. You have 2 parks in the city at present, and anything in the future is going to require some cooperation with private developers and private landowners. So that's something that should be considered in the future. And then designing these great spaces for the new mixed-use district. It's not just about business, but it's about providing the kinds of spaces in there that would accommodate the kinds of activities that people indicated that are missing, restaurants and places to have community events and to draw people from the outside and also for people to come together. And then tie that all in with having programmed public events and public art to help create and enhance that sense of community that you already have. From a transportation point of view, the 6 key things that came out as sort of opportunities was managing your speed and traffic calming. Pedestrian lanes were very important. We heard that again and again during the public meetings of how people don't have safe places to walk, and that it makes it very challenging to get around the community unless you're in a car, which of course affects children and others more than it does other people, such as us adults who drive cars. Making the streets multimodal, so they're not just for one form of transportation, such as vehicular travel, but for bicyclists and for pedestrians as well. Then providing safe connections to schools, providing bridges to get more connectivity between the community across some of your waterways that come through the city, your rivers. So we're not suggesting a lot of them, but there's probably a need for a couple more through the community in order to get some of that additional movement of traffic in the future as the community is growing. And then just, top that off with just better access everywhere and for everyone. And the transportation consultants really looked at, some of the same information that the land use did, but sort of with the idea of the future of how this was going to impact roads. This was showing, this map here is showing where there was going to be growth, basically, where you're going to have more employment in the future, today and in the future. It's sort of an indication. So you can see that in order to get to places of employment, it's going to be necessary to travel from the edges of the community into the core. That you can kind of see is being reflected by this graphic that shows how many vehicles are traveling on the various roads. And as you might expect, the freeway has the bulk of travel, but we do have significant amount of travel along State Street and through the core of the city, and then it sort of tapers down through there and then across the freeway and over to North 7th East. So these are, and that's how it is today. This is likely to get higher over time as the community grows. So taking that into consideration as we plan for the future is going to be very important. And this sort of summarizes it, where you're going to see change in transportation over time and where there's going to be more needs. So the darker the color on here, sort of the reds and oranges, is where there's going to be more and more traffic input over time. From a housing point of view, and we also had sub-consultants that worked with us on both the housing and economic development, Lewis Young, and they took a look at a number of things, but from a housing point of view, what they were, by state mandate, one of the key things that we're required to look at is affordable housing. And from I guess you'd say an affordability point of view, is this slide is showing that you're starting to get close to what where the housing is getting less and less, the public is less and less able to purchase a home or to have housing in the community. And that the ratio is, right now you're within the target levels, or what is considered a critical point, where the average renter or household owner is so burdened by housing costs that it's not sustainable. And you're not there yet, but it's trending towards that. And so it's something to be concerned about, that housing costs and housing access is going to be more and more of an issue in the future. And so that you can see that even right now that there's a gap of affordable housing units. And, these are the three categories of, that HUD considers, your extremely low, and what we call moderate income housing at 80% of the AMI, the average median income. And that we're lacking a little bit in that level, but significantly in the categories where there's even lower income. So it's something to be thinking about in the future, because that's responding to our current changes in inflation and what we're just seeing economically through the region. So the demand for future units in that category, the 80% category, is really the area where there's going to be more and more need. People that currently are not falling in that category are likely to fall down into that category. So providing for that 30%, so a third of your population in the future will be in that category. And it's important that whatever housing is envisioned for the future, that it meets the demand that's likely to be emerging. And so, as required by the state code, we're supposed to identify target programs or ways of tasks for the future. And this is going to become more and more onerous in the future. The state legislature just changed the rules again this year, and our focus, each community actually has to show how they're actually achieving, and just not how they're going to do it, but how they're actually performing. And so the three key recommendations that came out of this were to expand the zoning to allow for higher density and mixed use. So that is related to the land use plan that you saw, that is also changing some of the densities in there in order to accommodate future growth. To resolve any infrastructure limitations to development, primarily would be water and sewer at the most basic, but also any other infrastructure that might be required to provide access to the housing that people want in today's market. And then to promote accessory dwelling units. As you probably are aware, accessory dwelling units that are internal or inside of an existing building are permitted in all communities because of action from the state legislature last year. So this plan is saying to not only embrace that as legally required, but to even consider going beyond it as a fairly easy and less painful way of meeting the need down the road. From an economic development point of view, that you're doing pretty well here, particularly with your motor vehicle sales and food and beverage, which is probably an indication again of people stopping in the community, not just from the who live here buying those goods and services, but people coming from outside of the area. But you do have some issues with what we call leakage, where people who live here are not buying here, they're going outside the area, and you can see that's your major type purchases, a lot of them. So there is definitely a market here for meeting some of that locally and not, giving it up the ghost to the places elsewhere down the road. And it's something that the plan is recommending. You do have these sort of unique opportunities here as a marketable destination. We heard very clearly that people didn't want to be like Park City or something like that. And you do definitely have a unique niche here. If you care to increase it, it's something that would make a whole lot of sense. So that this marketable destination, both for internal growth, but having some clustered nodes of services here that you don't have now, that perhaps then again, people will be spending, your local citizens will be spending more of their money here, which is good for the city's economic health. And then properly scaled economic development, both from the neighborhood scale retail level and for other services as well. We also looked and incorporated into this, address the idea of your environmental conditions and to be aware of them as development happens, particularly looking at soils in the area and the relationship to your water bodies, your public utilities, where your lines are, and to, again, because this is the key urban service area in the county, it's something that you should covet and take very good care of in the future, and make sure that you use it wisely and that it meets the needs and that you take the best advantage of it as possible. Parks and recreation, from a parks point of view, as was mentioned, we have the two parks in the city. For the future, you're not going to need a whole lot to meet your current level of service. That being said, is that you could probably, and we're recommending that you look beyond that to create sort of a park system as an attractor for some of those economic reasons, as well as just for enhancing the quality of life. And that's illustrated in this recreation plan, of where you do have these sort of parks and other recreation destinations, primarily along the Weber River, but in other locations, bike courses and such. That's what's indicated as a special use park here. And the gun range, other things that really, this becomes somewhat of a great place to live for those reasons, but also can attract some outside visitation as part of special events in this future. The plan sort of concludes with not just only your goals and objectives for the future and clarifying them, but a list of some catalytic projects, as we're calling them, of things that should happen in order to get the community moving forward. The first thing, and probably the most important, is to make sure that your existing codes and ordinances are aligned with the general plan. The general plan sets the vision, but the codes and ordinances are what are important for making sure that vision takes place and takes form as is envisioned. So I would imagine that staff will be taking a look at some of the codes that are in place today and thinking about possible modifications. Creating these multimodal streets and pedestrian friendly and streets that are more than just about getting cars moving through the community is going to be important. Open space preservation strategies that we talked about in partnership with private landowners, stakeholders, and the county. And in particular, acquire any open space or easements along the Weber River as possible and as soon as possible. And investing in the marketing of your community. Again, if you don't want to be like a Park City, then don't market it that way, or people don't want to get a message about your place being something other than it is. And we can point to many towns that have taken that sort of by the bull by the horns and really invested in these marketing campaigns to let people know who they are, and have had great benefit from it. And I think that it's something that we're seeing as a great opportunity for Morgan in the future. And then just continue to develop your long-term infrastructure plan to make sure that you're keeping pace with the needs of the future, particularly as you're getting some additional growth happening. And with that, I think that's the end of my presentation. So I'll turn it back over to the Planning Commission. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Just before we transition, I want to maybe understand where we go from here as far as next steps. What kind of, this is good baseline information for most of us because A, we're involved in the process, and B, when it comes to land use decisions, we're clearly in the middle of that. As far as any remaining steps with the general plan and where it goes from here, I'd be interested in kind of getting a basic timeline of how this is moving forward.
Well, I'm not sure I can give you a timeline. Again, with Ty and Lisa not being here tonight, but I can give you the process of how this works. Is you're really at the stage now for getting ready for adoption. And so it's the purpose of the Planning Commission, as one of your key tasks, is to make a recommendation to the City Council. And so if there are any what you have now is a draft plan. And if you are happy with it, you can recommend it as is. If you have things that you think should be changed or modified, you can have those discussions and direct us and staff to make some of those, or at least to consider that those are what you would like to be changed. You will then recommend the draft plan with those modifications to the City Council. But that's really the next step, is being as a body that you will vote for making a recommendation to the City Council or not. That's probably not going to happen this evening. There needs to be, Jake, correct me, I don't think there has been a public hearing here yet, correct?
Not that I'm aware of.
Mr. Chair.
Teresa, you've got the floor.
Yeah, so in correspondence with Lisa, just to let you know, we have a tentative schedule would be, of course, our presentation today, a public open house on May 4th. Planning Commission on the May 17th would be a public hearing. And then June 14th would be the public hearing for adoption at the city council level, if we move it forward. That's a tentative schedule as of now.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. So maybe at this point, and we've got 20 minutes before our general session, I wasn't going to necessarily discuss either the other agenda items until the general session. So it might make sense to kind of, let's just discuss this as a body, in having seen this draft of the general plan for the first time, how that feels, what other, if any recommendations there might be. So I just want to open it up to the commission and also to everyone present. That includes online and in the room.
I need to be excused here in a moment, Mr. Chairman, but I do have a question. And so, recently we had a survey conducted by Y2 Analytical, and it was interesting that one of the major thoughts that came from that survey was, obviously, it was no surprise that people in Morgan wanted to see Morgan maintain its rural atmosphere. They didn't want to see a great big city develop here. They just wanted to maintain a rural atmosphere. How does that coincide with your general plan, where you're showing quite a lot of additional space in Morgan City? You're recommending it be zone medium density residential. I mean, how it almost seems like those two are a little bit contradictory to me, that, the public would like to see us remain rural, but you're suggesting that we open it up to a lot of medium density residential. And I guess as a city council member, that's kind of a concern I have.
Yeah, would you like me to answer or attempt an answer? And maybe Jake can join in here too, but
Go ahead, Mark.
I think that, you're right. I mean, I think this plan acknowledges that the city is going to change from what it is, but we're trying to change it in a way that acknowledges that. And it's perhaps, that by having a little bit more growth within the city, that will allow for preservation of more open feeling throughout along the edges and within the city itself. But having more of the focus on the form of the housing and the type of development that's coming in for creating this sort of rural community that's beyond what it is today. So, but you're right. I mean, I think this is going to represent, what the plan represents here is some significant more growth, but it's important again that we have the ordinances and the codes aligned with it, so that we end up getting the types of forms of buildings and of development that is going to match that. But there will be a change.
Jake, do you have anything
You
to add?
pointed out what could be, maybe a conflict, but whether it's a critical conflict, I don't know.
I have a few things to add to Mark. Is this concern you're talking about is very typical. Almost most cities on the fringe in the Wasatch Front, whether Wasatch Back or the front, the smaller cities are dealing with the same issue. Residents want it to stay the same. They like how the community is, yet the forces of development, population growth, opportunities to telecommute or work from home or second homes, and people just wanting to move out, and families having babies and growing, those pressures are pushing it. And it's good to listen and know what the residents want, but a part of it is also understanding what the reality may be. And I think the reality is Morgan City is going to grow. I mean, it really is. And you have to remember, this is a 10 to 20 year plan. And so that if all that land was rezoned at once and development started, it would seem monumental. But over time, step by step, it's maybe not as much. And it's really critical to think about how Morgan City will grow. That is really important. And you can still grow within the city boundary. And what Mark was talking about was infill, focusing on infill. Would you prefer that Morgan County, or excuse me, Morgan Valley had a rural atmosphere and Morgan City was a city? Or would you prefer that it was really spread out and sprawl like parts of South Jordan? Ogden Valley is really starting to sprawl and spread out everywhere. And so there's different philosophies. Do you want to focus on infill and the valley is preserved more as agriculture? Or do you want to just spread out and everybody gets 5 acres of heaven, which then doesn't turn into agriculture and is more like old farm equipment as art? So that's one thing to think about. That there's a lot of ways that a community can continue to grow, but still have that rural character, building heights, architectural styles, promotion of mom and pop businesses, that these are local businesses rather than, how many Starbucks and Wendy's and McDonald's and all of that you can cram in. So there's a lot of ways that Morgan can grow and still have that rural character. But saying we don't want to grow doesn't really work because families have babies. Most of our growth is still natural increase. That's families having babies. And then the second thing is jobs. If we have a good economy, then people stay and then they move in. And so I think part of that is just recognizing people want those values, but also there's private property rights and allowing for growth to happen, but maybe shaping it.
Yeah, and I think that last part of shaping it is probably the big, from my point of view, is it's, as Jake's saying, growth's going to come regardless, whether it's here or along the edges. And you're going to, if you plan for it properly, you can actually benefit from it by sort of helping to direct it in the right places and take advantage of it. If you don't, you're still going to have the negative impacts of the growth. You're going to have the traffic coming through your community for people to get to and from the different places. So it's a way of saying, let's kind of accommodate it, take a look at it and incorporate it. But at the same time, do it in a way that we acknowledge throughout the process and through, again, our codes and the way that we permit development, that we try our best to incorporate those elements of what makes our community great, which again, it's about the sense of open space. I'm not saying what those tools are going to be, Jake. I know that you're probably going to end up working on them, but the idea of incorporating some significant amounts of open space into the community is probably going to be a large part of the future tasks.
So just a couple of thoughts from my standpoint as a representative of our land use code in the city. A couple thoughts come to mind. One, I appreciated what you said, Jake, from the standpoint of there's really 2 general plans. There's the city general plan and there's a county general plan. And I think those should be cohesive. I personally like this idea of having a city. Clearly, the only way to not have growth is to, as mentioned, there's population control. You either don't let people move in or you don't let people have babies unless somebody dies. And that's how you create a ghost town. So we, smart growth makes sense. And as we look at the land in the city and how it can maybe be used, there were a couple thoughts that came to mind with the presentation. One of those, and interestingly, I had almost an opposite feeling of what Councilman London shared, where he felt, we were doing a lot of initiatives to promote the city and the growth. And the first thing that I remembered from the presentation was this commitment to this agricultural culture. There were about 8 things on that first slide that outlined how we want to use tax bases and century farms and preserving agriculture and whatever the other 5 points were. And I think that's valid, but I also think it's important to recognize that most the residents in this city and this county are not farmers. Yes, we have a lot of that, and we're very privately owned, but that doesn't mean it's the majority. And when we look at some of the survey stuff, the concern that I had, the Y2K analytics survey and or whatever those were, YK, 2K, something. We had, there are questions on there that don't necessarily resonate, with everyone. And so you kind of get this population of those that want to use farm equipment as art. But one of those things, for example, is, how often do you eat out? Once a week, once a month, once a year? And the percentage of people where that's once a year is like, man, how disconnected am I from the town in which I live? Because that is a bizarrely high percentage. These kinds of things, who are these people? I guess I don't know, because I never see them. They don't leave the farm. So I want to make sure that we don't skew one way or the other, that we maintain the character of the community. I like the rural, the agricultural kind of nature, but it also makes sense to build that smart infrastructure for the growth that keeps it healthy and a desirable place to be for all residents, whether you're the farmer or the bedroom commuter going to Ogden or Salt Lake every day for work. I think, we need to think that we've got both citizens here. It's not just the farmers and it's not just the city folk.
So as a part of the steering committee, when we were discussing this general plan for the last little bit, one of the things is exactly what Jacob was talking about. We don't know what the future is going to be. We've already seen in the last 5 years how it's changed dramatically due to certain events. And so one of the things we want to focus on is that infill. What are we going to do with it? Creating that, downtown general mixed use area allows for change and diversity throughout the years in an area that could potentially be a focus area on our affordable housing. And so yet you can have the mom and pop type businesses that we really want to have here and subsidized by what we do with the housing. And so that was one of the things that us as a city committee was really looking at, doing that. But I know that we worked for most of the time with the county on focusing on, city centers, of course, Mount Green, Morgan City, and maybe, working at trying to have a few village centers throughout the county and giving those farmers the opportunity to be able to, if they want to, develop. And I know they're still working on trying to balance that together in the county, but I just want to let you know that's one of the things we were looking at is how can we take the area that we currently have and in the future give an opportunity to do a variety of things.
Thank you, Teresa. We've got about 5 or 6 more minutes before we transition to the general session. We can continue with other feedback or thoughts as appropriate until then.
So, Mark or Jake, currently our zoning allows, and I'm talking about residential, allows, we've got 3 different designations, 10,000, 12,000, or 20,000 square foot lot. Our highest density, that is the 10,000 square feet, barely fits into your low density residential. Do those need to be aligned with the future land use plan? And maybe if they do, how does that happen? Because we're kind of worlds apart there.
Yeah, I can start the conversation. I'm sure Jake's going to want to weigh in, but yes, that's once you adopt their general plan, the next step, and as was recommended on the very first catalytic project, was to get your ordinances in line with the general plan. And so there's going to be a need to rewrite and make some changes to your zoning ordinance.
Wouldn't you need a community to go along with that? I mean, do we know that that's in line?
Yes, that's the same. It's a similar process to this. I mean, once the code is being developed and made, it will go through a separate adoption process. So the public will be involved in that as well. But without it, if you don't have the tools that are required to meet your vision, it will never be achieved. You will continue to operate within you have what you have now, and it won't work because it doesn't facilitate what the plan is calling for. So that's always something that, is I guess a bit of a tough pill to swallow, that if you have a significant change in vision or for the future, that you really need to invest in that next step. And I believe that Ty and Jake are already starting to talk about it. Correct me if I'm wrong, Jake.
I would say it's a process, Dave, of taking the general plan and picking specific areas and then working on updating the zoning. The fact that they're at adoption, they should be different because the general plan is looking forward and your ordinances are current. But that's where he's specifically looking at certain areas, the downtown area, maybe some other zones. The city would identify those, and that's where you would start with updating the ordinances. Some thoughts I have had on some of the densities is you could also look at changing the base density, but then also adding incentives for bonus density for amenities, conservation of open space, other things. So that's a way to do it as well, so that you change the base density, but then if the developer wants to do additional density, then the city may get more parks or trails or conservation of ag lands or all these other things. And now is the time for the planning commission to make changes as well. If you don't like some of the ranges, then now's the time to say, let's modify them. And the planning commission looks at it now, and then after the recommendation to the city council, then it's their opportunity to look at it and make changes as well.
So related to that, can we get a copy of what was just shared with us? I don't know if it's out on that website. Not yet. Okay. So however we receive a copy that we can review, and it feels like as a commission, we should review the catalytic, recommendations as well as, the general plan zoning designations and kind of get a sense of, does that, do the thresholds of those recommendations align with, what we're kind of thinking as well. So I think as homework, that's one thing that we can take away specifically from today's presentation.
So Chair, with that in mind, you could call me, or we can go maybe modify the tentative schedule if it's something you'd rather have another presentation, or if you want to jump right into an open house. The open house is scheduled for 2 weeks from now. If you want to talk about it, we can, I don't know.
Can I this is just my recommendation. I think if it's okay that we push the schedule out a little bit. I like I'm sorry, I'm still new to Morgan City, but I like the idea of maybe a 2-hour work session to really work through and talk about ideas and debate some things. And I have a few ideas I'd like to share and talk about, tweaking certain things, but it's probably better to do that before an open house and after. And I have some questions. It's like just questions. Have things been looked at and considered? If they have, great. If they haven't, let's just talk about them. So that's just my own thought, is maybe a 2-hour. And I know it sounds really long, but I think it may be needed so everybody has time to review the document, review the presentation, and then vet and debate their ideas.
I think that's appropriate. The last general plan was adopted in '99, so this happens 4 times a century, thereabouts. So let's get it right.
Yeah, and just to let you know, we've just had Jake come on board 2 months ago.
Last month.
1 month ago. And he's been very involved with other communities, some very big, large projects that are going to be beneficial to us, that he's got some good things we could add. So
we need to wrap up our work session. But I like the recommendation that Jake made. I think we need to come prepared to that working session. And, having looked through this, having ideas of our own, what we want to debate or talk about ahead of time. so that can be a productive work session and not just familiarizing ourselves with the concept. So let's do that. We're going to wrap up the work session at this point.
So Mark, it's okay to just that draft, we can send it out to the planning commission to review.
So they don't have a copy of the draft plan. I can send a copy of the PowerPoint that I did tonight, but
Yeah, either way, I actually have both. I mean, I
Okay.
do have a draft plan. We've just been using it internally for right now, but
yeah, I think it'd be
The
great
first-
to get it in their hands so that they can start getting through the details. This was just a really broad brush overview.
okay, I'll send that out.
Great. And you do have a copy of the PowerPoint as well, or should I send you a copy?
If you'll send that to me, the PowerPoint, I only
I'll
just
do that
have
right now.
the appendixes.
Great.
Thank you, Mark. Great research, really good looking document. You and Lisa and the rest of your team done a
Thank you.
good job.
Thanks. See everybody later. Thanks again.
Thank you so
Bye.
much.
We'll continue with the Zoom and whenever you're ready.
Okay, so does anyone need a minute before we start? Okay, we're running a couple minutes behind, so we'll reconvene here to begin our session at 7:05.
You got a refund on that. You got a refund. Don't try it. What I got from it. That's what I don't trust you. So I know. I got that. It's awesome. Well, if I had some sheepdog skills, I could help. Sorry.
The next one, City Council. Is the 26th, which is next Tuesday. And
All right, thank you for accommodating that slight delay. I appreciate that. My name's Nathan McClellan. I'm the chairperson. We will go ahead and start tonight's session of the Planning Commission meeting, which is Tuesday, April 19th, 2022. And if you're in the wrong place, then now you know. We have a few items on the agenda, but before we jump into that, I'd like to welcome a couple of our new members that are up here on the rostrum with us, Aaron Bott and Ray Little, that are filling in. And are they both permanent? That's. Thank you, Teresa. That's what I thought. So thank you so much for volunteering your time and being part of this process. I do appreciate that. So thank you. That being said, I want to remind those online and in the room that this meeting is being recorded and streamed live on YouTube. Also would ask that any visitors and members of the public that have joined us, please sign in if you have not already. That being said, let's jump right into our business for tonight. We have one item before the agenda, and that is to review the minutes from our last meeting, March 15th. And at this point, hopefully everyone's had an opportunity to review the packet, to read through those minutes and make sure they reflected what actually happened. And if not, to make any of those recommended edits today. Either way, I will at this moment entertain a motion to either accept the minutes or amend those minutes and then accept them.
I'll make the motion that we accept them as recorded.
Thank you. Is there a second on the motion?
Mr. Chair, I'll second that.
Any discussion? Thank you. Any discussion before we vote to accept the minutes? All in favor of accepting the minutes as outlined in the motion, please indicate. Looked unanimous to me. Thank you. We have 3 agenda items. One of them has been transitioned or revised over time. So originally, with respect to the RUP subdivision, we were going to have a discussion about the preliminary and final approval. At this point, that has been edited to talk through just a quick update. There's been debate among Teresa and I think Lance on who's going to give that update, but I will turn it over to you to take us through that first agenda item.
All right, we have pulled the subdivision off. Okay, so we've pulled off the agenda for preliminary and final for RUP subdivision. Staff has been working and engineering working closely with the developer. One of the things that the city council has always asked is that nothing sent to them contingent upon. And so with that in mind, the biggest thing that they have are 2 items. One's the Division of Drinking Water does need to review the application and give approval letter of the design due to the well protection area. This one falls in that area. The other one is, it's not huge, but there's a few design elements that the engineer, along with stormwater detention pond, needs to be modified. Other than that, everything that we've asked or needed in that from an engineering standpoint has been satisfied. So they've been doing a great job getting all of their approvals. It's just those 2 items we decided to hold off since they're asking for preliminary and final in one meeting until the May meeting.
And that was my next question is, should we expect this on next month's agenda?
Yes, Matt Harvickson was working with Hunter from the Division of Drinking Water. Asked him if he could get at least a review to see if it was in line, but Hunter's really busy, and so he's anticipating that being done in the next couple of weeks.
Thank you. Anyone want to add anything to that? With that, let's jump to our second agenda item at this point, which is the Clark UDOT subdivision First Amendment, Adams Storage. And we have a significant amount of information in our packet. Thank you, Teresa, for pulling that up. Just as some background, Jake, I'm hoping that you'd be willing to maybe share the staff perspective on this, and then we'll jump into kind of where we're at.
Thank you, Chair. I'll share what I've seen so far, my understanding. I'm still new to this project. Teresa asked me a question via email a while back if a plat change should go before the city or planning commission or staff approval. I did find in your ordinance, in the subdivision ordinance, any changes other than an error of the plat does need to go before the planning commission for approval, according to the ordinance. In regards to land uses, the proposed, land use of, well, there's no building types, but using it as an industrial, making the lot bigger. I think that's concurrent with zoning. The lot dimensions are also concurrent with zoning, and future building, of course, would need to meet zoning. But based on what I've seen from the lot dimensions, then it is following zoning code. I don't understand. I didn't have time to go through there was something about floodplain that Matt said. Do you have anything on that, Teresa?
So
Okay.
on page, I'm curious, I want to be clear the action that we're taking as a commission today. So the page that has those 5 points with the 4 of them with the plat and 1 with the improvement drawings. Yeah, that one. This to me is what's changing. This is the before and after. Is that accurate? This is the recommendations that were made, and so all the pictures that we're looking at reflect these recommendations. And I just want to make sure that's either a true statement or not.
Yeah, so what you're seeing here are, they're just updated from a proposal that didn't come to the planning commission a little while ago. And so he just updated those, but from the engineering standpoint, the roadway will be continued farther, and he'll want to be involved with those drawings, but that'll be a staff internal. But other than that, he didn't have any concerns. The applicant is here, so he can let you know what he's planning on doing with that additional acre.
Okay, that'll be good. Thank you. And I am just curious, the error that's being corrected. What was the error?
No, there's no. So the city's subdivision ordinance says that if there's a plat amendment or change, that staff can just take care of it only if there's an error, an issue with the
Oh, okay,
plat.
so
If
I misheard. I apologize.
If there's a change of a plat, which I view as moving a property boundary or adjusting a plat, then it does come before.
So it's not an administrative item of fixing an error that wouldn't need to come to us. It's the applicant proposing these changes.
Yeah, yes, any kind of plat change other than an error does go to the planning commission. By Morgan ordinances, I've reviewed it.
I'll give some opportunity for the applicant to address us, but any questions before we do that?
I did have a question for the applicant on, how come it says 3 in the middle and then on the other plat, I don't know, do you have the original? Okay. So then there's 1, 2, and 3. So, but my understanding is you're wanting to change lot number 1.
Correct. Yeah, UDOT is actually lot number 1. Should be, I believe. So UDOT is accessing our private drive. We're just adding on.
Okay.
So just for the public record, if you'll state your name and then keep the mic handy.
My name's Corey Adams, and we're the owner that is wanting to expand our business here in Morgan.
Great. So you can kind of keep that handy as you're pointing the things up there.
Confusion. This says, well, this says 3 and then yours is lot 1 on, so it
No,
took me a while to figure that out.
And we can update that. So
let me,
You please.
that lot 3 is where we're here, is an extension of the current plat. The current plat lists lot 1. Lot 3 now is an extension of 1. They've taken number 1 and made it larger. So the situation of making the plat larger or increasing that size of number 1, that's the reason we're here to determine that piece. So lot 1 was there. This lot 3 is 1 extended. If that makes any sense to you?
So adjacent to lot 1 was lot 2. Does lot 3 then the combination of 1 and 2?
Lot, touch that private road. That private road is the road that goes back into UDOT.
yeah,
That road goes back into UDOT.
UDOT accesses their building.
That road is still, see that road?
UDOT accesses their building through our private drive.
That road's between lot 1 and 2.
Okay, got
Go to the
that.
next screen, please, Teresa. That private drive still sits same place,
Here's the access point for the
same
UDOT.
place, same private drive. All they did is took lot 1, expanded, it, made it bigger, and called it lot 3.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
And how much additional land?
It's 1 acre.
1 acre.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you'd have a total of the 2.54 acres.
So is this lot directly north of where your current
Correct.
storage is?
Yep.
Okay, that blank, yeah, okay.
So just to clarify then the actions before us, I think I'm clear at this point that 3 is a bigger version of 1 and it's extending to the left, not the right.
Correct.
Private drives in the same spot. I think I'm good there. So what we're doing is changing that boundary within this bigger subdivision, this UDOT subdivision. So where did that acre come from? Was that, because this around here says Rich Acres LC?
Yes.
Is that you're the landowner, you're Rich Acres LC?
No, that's the Clark Dairy Farm.
Okay. Okay.
Rich Acres is a Clark dairy farm, the Clark family. They own the rest of all those fields surrounding that area. Rich Acres is who this was originally bought from, the original plat. So what's proposed is they're buying an additional piece from the Clark family, which was called Rich Acres. That's the name of the Clark family. They're just expanding that one. The whole reason we're here today is just because they want, and the use is the same use. So it's not against any code as far as the use goes. So the only question is expanding that, changing the size of that one lot. The question is in my mind, is as far as the discussion between the engineer and the plot map, is the plot map show the kind of things we need. There's been discussion on other parts of this development as far as the road, drainage, those kind of things. And none of that's shown here tonight. So the question is, do we want to approve it? And just really you're approving the change to the zoning, not the zoning, excuse me, to the original plat map. You can change that. I don't know if this group wants to listen to and adhere and talk about the other ramifications of the road finishing the road, drainage, those kind of pieces. Or whether you want to just have staff work with that, with Adams's to develop those kind of concepts with drainage and roadway. As I said, that's the two pieces before us tonight. Are you okay with changing the plat map to include more ground within the same plat map? Same use, same purpose. You want to have this group flesh out all the details on the road, the drainage, all that stuff, or do you want to allow staff to go work on that? Staff could, if it wasn't exchanged, staff could work on the drainage and those kind of things, and they could work on that. Doesn't matter whether you want to prove that tonight or not.
Just for my benefit, I apologize for all the rest of you. Probably as clear as can be. But so that expansion, this new lot 3, that incremental acre, we're changing a plat, but I'm confused as far as where that acre came from. Was it part of the rich piece, and you're buying additional land?
Yes,
from them?
that's
Okay.
correct. We're buying it from that.
So you
that
buy the
family.
additional land,
or
it's
that entity.
contingent, now it becomes part of that subdivision. That part makes sense to me. I just wasn't sure, like,
Yeah.
why was that already your land, but not part of the plat?
Yeah, they
So-
buy it from Clark.
okay, so you bought that from Clark's, and
And
as
our, just to be clear too, is our access, how we have customers come into our business will still stay the same. That's not changing at all.
okay.
All we're doing is adding so that we can expand our business here in Morgan.
So since I made the connection, I will go ahead.
Step up the map and show it. Just trace on the map. Thank you, Teresa, for pointing that out. Thank you.
So the current access point, here's in Industrial Road. It ends, all right.
Circle it.
Okay, so here's our access point. That's still staying the same. We have a security gate here, so that individuals who lease or rent storage from us will come through the secured gate to access this additional acre that we're looking at right here. Okay, this will all be fenced in. We'll only have still the one access point.
You can,
So nothing changes on the use. It's still within the correct
On-
zone. We're just looking to expand.
Sure.
on the map, go ahead and point out where the current buildings there that house the storage are those 3 right there.
Yes.
And now what they're asking for is where they do the red circle to expand that, put more buildings where the red circle is. That's the question.
Well, no, the question is to incorporate this property into the original lot. We're just expanding it.
All right, I think that's helpful for me for sure. What is the thoughts of it? Go ahead, Aaron.
If I can ask a question, just for the benefit of the new girl here, the memorandum that was included in the packet does give the recommendations of the city engineer that Mayor Little alluded to with the drainage and continuing the road. So what is the process for that? Do we need to approve this contingent upon those improvements being made? Or is that just a recommendation and hey, we'd like it if you do it? Or I guess why was that included and how does it affect our action?
Why don't you go first and then?
Okay, so any new development, you do have to make sure that, you have the infrastructure in. And so that's one of the things that has been in discussion with the city attorney of how far industrial road needs to continue on. He's been given a couple of options to do that. So it would be a development agreement through the city council. And then the road would need to be engineered to city standards and staff would be highly involved in that.
So would it be then a completely separate action from making it one lot? Or would we make it one lot with the understanding that that was going to happen?
Correct.
Yeah,
That's
you're
how we've
second.
been told with the city attorney and the city planner is this is just to amend that piece of property. For us to develop that piece of property, then we need to work with staff on going through those measures. But the planning commission's oversight here is to, look at it and say, yeah, that makes sense. It fits within the zoning. It fits within the plan.
And just to add to that, if we approve this, any development on that property still has to meet the ordinances of the city. So they still have to meet, those requirements, the minimums, those kinds of things. And so for us, I don't know that at least my opinion is that it doesn't need to be contingent on that, because that's already a given. It already is. They can't develop something that's not compliant with the ordinance. That being said, we've got a 1 acre expansion with a consistent use, and it's our decision and action that we need to take as to whether that's appropriate. Now, Mr. Little also shared that there could be some future concerns with respect to infrastructure, road kind of thing. And part of it is, do we discuss as that part of this approval and concern and question, or is that irrelevant to our decision? So commission members, please weigh in on that.
Yeah, so the memorandum that Matt Harvickson provided, city engineer, there were 4 recommendations on the plat and then recommendations for the improvement drawings. And so the design platting process going forward is first the plat, changing the plat, and then second, the design drawings that would be approved by staff, particularly engineer. My recommendation is that the plat should be correct before the planning commission approves it. That's how I see it. That's coming off of best practice. I don't know the history of Morgan and all of that. So that's the new guy to the table saying, I think just asking that the plat be updated with these are good recommendations, and he's provided those for a reason. It makes for a cleaner process. You're not approving something as it should be in the future. You're approving a plat change that has some of those basic recommendations that the engineer made.
Okay, so go back to if you would, Teresa, the drawing of the plat, or the proposed plat. There we go. So we'd be looking at, no changes on private drive, but that industrial road to extend the length of the development, based on what Jake just shared.
But that shows the extension, Jake. That wide, this road.
It is not agreed to go to the end of the lot.
Correct, because this property here hasn't been annexed. Only this property. So whoever's going to develop that, I'm in agreement with you. We're not developing.
You're the end of the line.
So the recommendation reads as such: the plat should dedicate the extension of industrial drive for the full length of the proposed lot. And now, the drawing has it to that point, and I just want to make sure I understand what's appropriate. One way or another, and I mean, it looks like an argument could be made for both. I just want to be clear.
Correct. Yeah, so we don't own that. Rich Acres LLC do. They would have to dedicate it to the city. Well, they don't want to do that at this point because they're not selling any more property. No one's developing that.
If I may, just so everyone's aware, when this project, this subdivision went in a dozen years ago, probably a little less, somehow through the whole process, it got missed that UDOT did not extend the road all the way to the end of lot 1. They ended it just barely past their driveway. It didn't make it all the way till end of lot 1, which it should have, but it just got missed somehow. So now that note where it talks about extended to the end of the lot, that could almost be almost as a misspeak, or not, maybe not a typo, is it's it is going to expand to the end of the original lot, but not to the end of the proposed lot. So this is kind of a little bit of a tricky area here. This should have already been done. But now it was just something that got missed years ago when this originally went in. So whoever develops the next piece, Rich Acres is not going to be able to sell anymore adjacent to the new lot 3 without selling that right of way. And whoever they sell that right of way to, they're going to then have to extend the utilities from where they are now extending to the end of the original lot 1 all the way to their lot, which you would almost assume that maybe as part of that, the property across the street would develop. And so then they're going to have to, so that may be kind of a little, I don't know, clerical, I don't know, one of those words that one word could have been changed to the original lot 1, and it probably would make more sense.
It would have, and that clarifies it for me. I just at this point, because I'm making the connection in my head, Rich Acres is Rich Clark, who is my grandma's brother. I want to declare at this point that I have no financial interest or conflict of interest in this this situation, but I do want to at least disclose that, so that everyone's aware. All right, other thoughts?
There are some other items on here. Maybe the applicant can address? Number 2, the Water Advisory Board should verify the proposed change is consistent with any previous approvals. Number 3, the FEMA Special Flood Hazard Area Zone AE is on the property. Please indicate the FEMA zone boundaries on the plat. Provide a note indicating the development restrictions as they relate to the floodplain. And then number 4, approval of the plat is subject to the guarantee of necessary public improvements. An escrow account should be set up for extension of public improvements or other arrangements by the city council. Obviously, number 4, I think, would be a development agreement, but indicating where the flood zone is and any restrictions.
So the flood zones restricted based on what you are going to build. So say we can't build a building that's going to have a basement in the flood zone, right? It needs to be out of the flood zone, which eventually if we expand, we will do that, right? We're not going to build a building that's going to be in the floodplain because of the financial ramifications of that through flood insurance. So to me, that's addressed when you actually build something. At this point, again, we're looking at amending the subdivision to add this acre to it. So I think the engineer is addressing it beforehand, saying, hey, you need to be aware of this. It's in the flood zone. That limits what you're going to be able to build there, right?
Well, he did say indicate on this plat is the terminology. I guess I'd like to ask him about that, but you make a good point that construction does depend on the type of flood. And of course, there are ways to work with FEMA.
Correct.
To change those. I know about that.
Yeah, which we've done that before on this piece of property, actually.
And Mr. Little has a comment.
Congratulations. Number 2, that process takes place before building permits given. So that's not necessarily something that needs to be done at this point. Before building permits issued, the Water Advisory Board has to meet before that's issued. So the Water Advisory issue will be taken care of prior to building permit. That answers number 2 for us. Number 3, the floodplain that we just kind of talked about. And it is floodplains on that piece of ground. You need to be aware of that. It'll be on the plat as well for city council information.
Thank you for that. Are there any other of these 5 points that anyone wants clarification from the applicant on?
So, Mr. Chair, On this, we are simply approving the new number 3, right? The other items here are comments. They're not necessarily required to be finished at the time of us approving the plat. So with that, if everything else in the zoning and the ordinances allow for this, per what we do, we can make a motion to approve it. We don't have to make any contingencies, correct?
That's how
Okay.
I understand it.
So am I okay to make a motion?
You ready?
All right. I'd like to make a motion that we approve the new plot plan to expand previously plot 1 to be the new plot 3 as shown in the First Amendment plan.
Thank you. We have a motion on the table. Is there a second to the motion?
Make a comment, are we making a positive recommendation?
This is something, as I understand, that we can approve directly. If this doesn't go to the city council.
Based on what Justin just said, I think I will second it.
Okay, so we do have a motion on the table. It's been seconded. Before we vote, is there any discussion on this particular motion?
Okay, yes, I have a question. Just circling back to what you said about wanting the plat to be correct before we approve it. I have no objection to what he wants to do here. My question is, do we need to clarify any of the language in the recommendations that came from the engineer? Because what was just said was, well, that's a given, these will be done after I own it, but they won't because it's not written correctly. And so then we were told, well, this won't be added to the plat until I decide to build. Or in a couple different places, it says that the extension of Industrial Drive needs to go for the full length of the proposed lot. Now, it makes sense that it can't because that property is not owned. But do we need to worry about those discrepancies in language?
In my opinion, no.
Okay, that's all I needed to know.
That's in my opinion. I am not legal counsel. But, and partly because this is a matter of public record. And we've discussed that first recommendation was not written, as intended. The intent was to extend the full length of the original property, even though it didn't get written that way. But I think that's now been clarified as part of this process.
Well, and if we completely disregard any of the other improvements that will be necessary on the lot in the future, and we just deal with that narrow scope, just adding that extra acre to expand the existing lot, then that I think we're prepared to vote on.
Okay. Anyone want to add anything to that or correct any assumptions that I might have made? So let's go ahead and vote on the motion to approve the proposed plat amendment. All in favor? It's unanimous. Motion passes. Thank you. Appreciate that, Corey. Corey, right?
Yes.
Well, that was asked. I thought the plat changes were direct, but I could be wrong.
Poor Steve keeps getting kicked out and he's in St. George. So.
If we did it wrong, we can toss that and
This is what the ordinance says. This is coming from 11.02.070 recorded plat amendments. A recorded subdivision plat may be amended only to correct minor surveying or drafting errors. All other changes in recorded plat shall be allowed only upon compliance with the re-subdivision procedures of this title. The planning commission shall determine whether a recorded plat may be amended or first vacated and re-subdivided in accordance with the intent of this section.
Looks like Steve might have just popped back in. Steve, if you can hear us.
So Steve, this is not gonna. I've got you on my phone. Can you hear us? Oh, so which would, okay, so, I can hear myself. So with Steve's, text message,
Yeah, let's have him.
can you go ahead and get on, Steve?
So Steve, it looks like you're in a Zoom session. If you can
Yeah, because it
unmute one
shows
or
that
the
you're
other.
muted. It's gonna try again. The problem we're having is he's got really poor and.
Okay, can you hear me?
We
Oh,
can hear you.
yes. So we can hear you, Steve.
The question, Steve, is on this amendment to the plat. We just passed a motion to approve the amendment, and then the question was that appropriate? Should we have made a recommendation to the city council, or were we okay to take that action?
Well, generally what you can do is you can make an approval and say that the recommendations by staff are requirements. But it is, Teresa told me that Gary had stated that there would be a development agreement by the council. And if that's going to happen, then that would need to take place before any permits were issued for the additional development.
So with respect to the actual plat amendment, not necessarily the future development, the action of the plat amendment on its own, is that something that the planning commission has the authority to take that action independently, or should that be a recommendation for the city council to approve?
No, what you did was proper. Just with the understanding that the development agreement will need to be done and completed before any permits are issued or any further development occurs.
Okay, thank you, Steve. That answered my question. Is that all right? Thanks, Steve. That completes agenda item number 2. We have one more agenda item that we've talked about in the past. And so if you wouldn't mind, Teresa, advancing the packet to show what we're trying to do here. And let me just outline that. So agenda item number 3 is to discuss a potential amendment to Ordinance 10-16-160, which is the commercial manufacturing land use classifications, and specifically Table 4.2. And this would be something that we have looked at. We last month passed out this exact same table 4.2, which shows a number of different uses, and then where those uses are approved. So it's either explicitly allowed or not allowed in these different zones. And the question and where this kind of originated, if you remember, we were working on some of our training, and Wilf talked to us about conditional use, and kind of indicated, well, we should be more explicit and look at how this is laid out and what's conditional. Should it be conditional or should it just be approved in that zone? And so these different codes in the table, we can see P is a permitted use, C is a conditional use, and if it's blank, It looks like the use is not permitted in that particular zone, so we can see the different zones. So that's what we're trying to do, is look at this and say, is this still appropriate? Should we be looking at additional uses, being maybe a little more inclusive or exclusive in what's permitted versus what's conditional in these zones, and kind of go through this. So I'm going to open it up to the commission just for some initial thoughts with respect to the table 4-2.
I thought one of the things that we were trying to do was to simplify this some way, to make it shorter. But I, as I've gone through it, I don't know if that's possible to eliminate any of these. I guess what you're asking is, should the conditional requirement be removed? Is that the question at hand?
I think that's not the only question, but that's certainly one of the questions is, are there any Cs on this table that we think should just be Ps? Or Cs on this table that if we don't want it, that's not permitted. And so it is looking at that, but it's not limited to that.
So, Mr. Chair, can I start off with one that I had a question on?
Please, go ahead, Teresa.
So we have in column 1 is commercial general, commercial central, continuing on to commercial highway, and then manufacturing. For example, car wash is permitted in the commercial general and commercial central. My question is why is it a conditional use permit in commercial highway and in the industrial when there's a less of an impact? So should it be a conditional use in a commercial highway and a manufacturing, or should it be permitted? In my book, I think permitted because it has less impact in those areas. I'm not sure why it was a conditional use permit in the first place.
Well, and there's a lot of these that are like that, that maybe I don't understand what the original thinking was and why, a muffler or brake shop in 2 of those zones are conditional and 2 of those are permitted.
Along those same lines, auto repair and muffler or brake shop and paint and body shop, are they that different? At least auto repair and muffler and brake shop. I mean, a lot of times auto does multiple things. So those might be opportunities to consolidate.
Well, and here's kind of what I'm thinking, the default as we've been trained is that, a conditional use is still a permitted use in the sense that unless we can't reasonably mitigate, and that doesn't mean eliminate, but mitigate whatever nuisance, then by default, we need to approve it. That's at least my interpretation of what we were taught. That being said, I'm thinking about what are the nuisances that some of these businesses or uses might introduce. And as long as there's not really a nuisance that needs to be mitigated, why would we make it conditional? If it's just a regular business in an allowed zone, let it do its thing. But if it's something that's going to create, maybe that's why muffler, that's could be a noise nuisance if they're testing these things. I don't know, but would that need to be mitigated to have that in an insulated, soundproof, whatever? But it's that kind of thing that I'm thinking of is, almost everything, unless there's a nuisance that needs to be mitigated, should be permitted, unless I'm misunderstanding.
Can I make a comment?
Yeah.
Well, I can answer Teresa's question. I think for me anyway, the answer is in the ordinance here. that for highway, when we were talking about a car wash, the language says the primary focus should be on uses which require large retail display or merchandise storage areas and serve a regional market. So I don't know if these decisions were made so much with the intention of excluding businesses, and that's probably why it was made conditional, or was this just a previous commission's effort to follow their plan and try and encourage the right kinds of businesses and the right kinds of zones as they saw it playing out? In which case it may still be outdated, but it seems to me that that was a logical reason for classifying many of these the way that they are.
It's a great point. And part of what we've been trained on recently, Aaron, is what this idea of conditional means. Conditional doesn't mean it's discretionary. It doesn't mean that we as a commission can choose whether we want it there or not. We have to determine if any nuisances are created and how can those be reasonably anticipated and mitigated. And as long as that can happen, then we can grant the permit. And so by default, the bias is towards approval. So the condition doesn't mean that we can just make a decision on whether we want it or not.
Right. So conditional is essentially a yes, unless there's a
Correct.
reason
That's
against
correct.
it. Yeah.
That's exactly right.
In addition, I would add ordinances can also list what the condition, they should list what the conditions are. Permitted uses, there's regulations to go with those. Conditional uses also conditions for those, and then mitigating negative impacts as well. I do have a question for Teresa. For residential and commercial areas, it is permitted, but so this is where the ordinance needs to be fixed as well, because the historical area does permit residential in certain ways, but then it's not listed as permitted here. Can you, I don't know a lot more about that other than that point.
And Steve, do you want me to answer, or do you want to answer the difference of what we've had? I know that's one of the things we've been talking about, is we really wanted to start, having more mixed use in the areas. But we just, in any commercial, have always prohibited residential. And then when we did the historic overlay, correct me if I'm wrong, Steve, is that's when we says, this area, we encourage mixed use as a subordinate, and that's the only place it states that that's allowed. And I know there is a conflict as far as the classification table.
While Steve's jumping on, I guess that's where the overlay zone kicks in, because it is an overlay zone. And so as a permitted
Correct, and
use.
that was done intentionally with hopes that
We had you for a minute, Steve, but you cut out.
Can I ask,
so, yes, that was done intentionally, like I started to say, an overlay zone. Okay, and
I can't translate that. Steve, it's a valiant effort.
Yeah. So that's what it was, is that when we created the historic overlay zone and started with the guidelines, during that process, it was encouraged, let's go ahead and have mixed use where it would be subordinate to a commercial type use in the area, as a means to, if you were an owner of that building or that commercial use, you'd be able to sustain yourself in that and be able to live above. So that's the only zone that currently allows it. But we never did change the classification table. And I don't know if it's because, really, we have more commercial central area than we have overlay. So it wasn't kept in the commercial central as a use, just in the overlay zone. Does that make sense?
And pardon, I don't know the answer to this, but is the historical also in the land use table? And does it have land uses listed as well?
No.
No, okay.
Mr. Chair, can I ask a question and maybe even recommend something here? I mean, this table is, to me, it looks like it was made a while ago. There's things that we may not understand that were put in here. I know that staff might be looking for more to do. That's with some sarcasm. But I mean, honestly, I believe that there are several of these that could be combined or eliminated altogether. I would like to see that there's either staff takes this on or maybe a group of us and make a recommendation on which ones could be combined and even a recommendation on which ones could change between conditional and permitted. Otherwise, we might debate individual one of these forever. So I would recommend that. I don't know if I have to put that in the motion or not, but to me, that makes more sense than us trying to debate all of these different points right now, right here.
Yeah, I think it's smart to have a strategy on how we want to approach this. We know we want to refresh it. You know, let's bring this into the modern era. That's a noble goal. Going line by line as a committee is probably the least efficient way to do it. And I like the idea of, you know, starting with, you know, in debate they would call it a straw man. You know, starting with something that you can react to and maybe tear down ultimately, but at least you've got something to work with and not a blank slate. So I think that's appropriate. I would want to see that done maybe more redlined where we could see what was eliminated and or added. And the reason for that is we want to make sure that, you know, although it feels like it's a good housekeeping kind of thing to clean up the table and make it more reflective of today, we don't want to have any unintended consequences that we didn't have the foresight to anticipate. Now we can't anticipate everything, but we should at least kind of think through that as we go.
So Nate, you know, we recently changed the ordinance to for the conditional use and aligned it with the you know, more along with the state guidelines. And Wilf was very helpful in doing that. I'm wondering, Jake, could there be something you could help us with similarly that would say this lines up better with what the state is asking? Maybe a best practice, maybe something from another city. I mean, is it possible that we don't even use a table 4-2?
The answer is yes, I can help you with that. And working with Teresa and staff, maybe we working with staff, we prepare a draft and that could go before the whole planning commission, or you could have, as mentioned, you could have a committee take a look at it ahead of time as well. I'm open to either way you want to go about that. A table is a pretty good way to do that because it's nice because you can see all the land uses at once and they're summarized there. And then each one of these, of course, references a definition. And so maybe at the same time, if the city's going to be updating the land use table, also updating the definitions to go with it. And there may even be some new ones we want to add, just new business types, things that you think are, you know, more 21st century kind of things that are happening to add or be aware of.
So just a quick question on that. If something is not on this table and I come in and I buy a piece of land and I want to put this business and I don't see it listed here one way or another, what does that mean for me as the landowner?
It's not approved. Okay.
So
Unless
if it's not listed, it's not even up for negotiation. It's automatically not approved.
correct. Now, if there's a way that it can fall under the umbrella of one of these, then yes. But
And there's a lot here, so I mean, that should cover pretty much everything, but you never know.
I don't know, you take one example, there's no food truck business listed on here.
Say that again.
For example, there is no food truck business listed. Where's that permitted at? Is it permitted? Do you know what I mean? To your point, Nate, I think that's something that a focus group that you guys go through and add or take away and then present it back. I don't know, just as a public and I don't know, this is not public comment period, but that's a business that's very 21st century now. We see a lot of it in our community. Where does it need to be at?
Regardless of whether you're in an official position or not.
Additional one is, Airbnb nightly rental. That's something that I don't know how deep, that's probably in the residential one, but that's actually a business as well. If somebody's running a property as a nightly rental, then it should be viewed as a business and operated as such.
Yeah.
And so there are other ones to look at.
Well, I like the approach of doing this a couple of different ways. One, if Jake, you can spearhead this with staff to categorize it like this. Here's what's not here, but should be. Here's what is here, but shouldn't be. Or here's what is here, but needs to be modified. So those three scenarios. I also feel like the entire burden shouldn't be on staff. And in the sense of, we as a commission need to look through this list, read each line individually, and determine if there's anything in here that we're particularly passionate about, call that out and not just passively approve something that staff recommends next month. So that's kind of the ask. And Teresa, if you could maybe send us as a commission a reminder, maybe in 2 weeks, to send any of those that we are passionate about as a recommendation to staff.
I would ask for a week just so we could have time, but maybe over the next week, if the planning commission could send any ideas you have to Teresa, she can gather those and then share them, if that's okay.
So
That way we
give
can have
us a
time.
week to do that.
Yep.
And then you'll have the rest of the time up until the next meeting to put something else in front of us to react to.
Yeah, and it would be a kind of a red line draft version, so you can see, you can track changes.
Just a quick question. If our first step after the plan is passed is to rework our ordinances, will these ordinances be affected at all? And if so, wouldn't it be better to rewrite them before we redo the whole table?
Great question. Good idea. And what I'm seeing in the general plan are some big steps. This is more along the line of little to medium steps. And so I don't see an issue with making these minor steps, because some of the things in the general plan are significantly different. However, if there are things that you see in the draft general plan that you consider to be very safe and solid, there's no reason why you couldn't, at this point, go ahead and put those in. And this could be a draft process. So this is not finalized until the general plan is adopted as well. That's something to consider, as well as maybe this runs a couple months as just a review process. And then when the general plan is recommended, then you take it up as well. That's a very safe way to
That's how
go.
I see it too, is, Aaron's point's a good one from the standpoint of, we don't want to do rework. Let's rewrite this, go through the process, do the public hearing, send it over to the city council, they approve it, and 2 months later, it's obsolete. But the work that we're doing to look at each of these land uses is valid, whether we change the ordinance one way or another with the general plan or not. And we still want to look at this. So I don't think that's wasted effort. Now, at some point, we may make the decision to have this coincide with the adoption of the general plan, which I think is fine, but I think we can continue along these lines. That's how I see it. Does anyone else have a different opinion you want to share?
I would just add, as a possible help here, we're not the only city doing this, and I'm guessing that some have updated theirs more recently than we have. Those are public record. You might as well go see who's done what, and they're going to have some options there too. You may already know some that have done it recently, so.
Every city, right now, a lot of cities are doing this. Every city ordinance is very unique, though. They've been crafted over time, and a lot of them been copied from copies and adjusted. And so they're all unique, but but typically, cities generally have a land use table and they have definitions. And so if there's any particular city you'd like me to look at, you say I think that's a well-planned city that I like, I'd be happy to take a look at. I think Layton would be a good one to look at just because Gary Crane and Steve connection there. And so some of their ideas being here in Morgan City. Yeah, I think it was 3 years ago they did it. So they've had time to work on their ordinances. But yes, absolutely. And the great thing about city planning is they're all public documents available.
I mean, and that doesn't have to be limited to, again, if there's one we're thinking of to direct you to, we can do that. And it's a fantastic idea, Justin. I like that. It's not limited to just staff. Any one of us can access another city's code and look to see if there's anything that gets us excited. What else?
I think earlier on, Aaron made an excellent comment. I think it's good to keep in mind what the areas are: CG, CC, CHMD. The purpose of those, it's good to keep that in mind as you look through it. I don't know if you covered that before. If you want to I guess we just talk about the purpose of those 4 classifications. That I think it'll help. Okay.
Clarification, are we just looking at the commercial half at this point? Sure. Okay. That's great. I like that.
She's smart. She knows our limits.
Right.
So
I mean,
Nathan, if we have no other comments before we adjourn, we can just recap what we're planning on doing.
Recap the what? I'm sorry.
What you want planning on doing for next one.
So a couple things. So with respect to agenda item number 3, there's 2 action items. One's for staff and one's for the commission. Staff, I would like to redline the existing 4-2 into 3 categories. The redlining will come with what's already there that should stay there but needs to change. And then the other 2 categories are what's not there but should be, and what is there but shouldn't be. So that's what I'd like to see from staff. In addition to Justin's recommendation, which was maybe seeing if there's a best practice with a sister city that we could maybe borrow from or be inspired by. So that's the staff action. The commission action would be in a week, send any of our own feedback based on any of these items that we feel particularly passionate about to the city, to Jake, to Teresa, and so that can be incorporated in the amendment or the revision. The second thing that any of us can do if we want to seek that inspiration on our own is to look at, maybe there's a city that you're a big fan of. You drive through it and you think, man, this city's just nice. Well, if you have something like that in mind, look up their city code and see if they have anything that resonates. So those are the 2 actions as I see it. I am seeing something in chat. Can you just check what's in chat before we wrap up? It's up at the top. This might have been a while ago. Okay, I think we've covered that. All right. Any final thoughts before we make a motion to adjourn?
I just had on the presentation for the planning, the general plan. So if I had this correct, we want to have a 2-hour work session next month with that tomorrow we'll send out the presentation presented today by Mark and also the draft for review. Is that what you wanted to do?
That's exactly it.
Okay.
That'd be
I
great.
don't know if Landmark needs to be here. Jake, you need to just decide that. I think,
I think it would be good. They prepared the plan. But that's up to you and also if they can make it. Sometimes it's nice to have an informal discussion that without it, or maybe you want to.
I mean, to me, that's part of the, yes, the working session is still a public meeting, but it is more informal. And I feel like we might get some better input. Yeah, that's, I like that.
And is that the 17th? The third Tuesday? Okay.
And just quickly, giving Ray the floor.
And my kind of general plan, as Nate talked about all the purses up front, I think they're all awesome. To me, that's stars in the sky, what we think we want. I think the other parts of the plan, as far as the classification to the zoning, there's some big changes there. Nothing we're used to. We've hired some professional planners, put their thoughts to it, which are generated by other thoughts from the ongoing emphasis of more housing. I think this group has in my opinion, big opportunity / responsibility to try and look at that seriously. In my mind, you take each one of those classification areas and go out and look at that area in town. What's currently there? What do you want to have there? And see if this proposed zone allows that or not. And it may or may not. I'm not saying it does or doesn't. I think a way to go through that, do our due diligence would be to take zone, I'd forget the classifications, CG15, whatever they are.
yeah, and if you look at that general plan and when I send it to you, when it says no, I can't even think of what it is too. It's in there, it'll tell you what they are,
What they envision
what
in
that
that
is
area.
envisioned in that area. So if you're looking at I think it's the major general mixed use zone.
There's some
Tells
major,
you what that is.
there's some major proposed changes with that. And it's our opportunity, if this group wants to, just take a section at a time and really look at that. And see, is that really what we envision the future to be? I think Nate's correct. Does that then help to solidify the goals and thoughts of the community? I think it's very valuable to weigh those pro and con. I think the idea of a 2-hour work session is awesome to sort through that. There are decisions made, look at that, and just openly talk about it. That work session, I visualize, it's not necessarily making any fast decisions. We get some ideas out there and openly talk, openly discuss, be open minded, try and see where we go with all those.
If it's okay, the planning commission, I do have a few things on the general plan that maybe I would share. 5 minutes, no more. Is that okay?
Can I add one more before
Yeah.
question on the zoning and the permitted use? Does the county have a similar chart? When was it? Do we know when it was updated last or?
The last time that the general plan for the county was updated was 12 years ago. I'm not sure exactly how much of that's done. That's your general plan. I don't know when their rezone was done or their zoning map was done.
So my question that goes along with that is, should we coordinate, talk with them? Will they talk with us, on how that works? Because the city boundaries bump up against what the county has, and those permitted uses will collide at some point.
I think that it would be a good idea for you to look and see what they are. They're a lot different than what well, I shouldn't say a lot, but there is quite a few differences just because they have a lot of, they don't have a very big commercial area compared to the city, so.
Well, I think it's an appropriate ask.
Yeah, but it is, I would look at it and go from there, but I know the general plan change was done in 2012, but I don't know how much rezoning they did.
I think the emphasis for me, if I'm thinking about a community that looks planned as opposed to, hodgepodge, it's those transitions from jurisdictions. So the boundary areas from city, if we're slowly buffering out and becoming less dense as we get to the boundary, but then the county has something else planned right at that boundary. It'd be good to know that. I think those smooth transitions, and there's going to be little hubs the county has, in the different areas where there's some concentration of things. I think it's smart to look at both plans in conjunction, and where we're as a city body are concerned maybe is more immediately with the boundaries of the city as they meet the county boundaries.
So with this general plan, what happened was the city had put in for a grant that UDOT was offering to rural cities to update the general plan. And when it was granted, it says, yes, you can have it as long as you include the county as well. And so that's how that became. And so the county has been twofold. They're doing a general plan update in conjunction with Morgan City. They also have received some additional money to do, they're called area mapping, is that what it's called?
Like an area plan?
An area plan. And they've received funding for 2 areas, one in Mount Green and one in Peterson. And so they've got that on top of it. They're kind of, juggling both at the same time. They're having difficulties because, the general plan is different than what these area plans are. And yet, when you get funding, you got to do what you got to do. But so they do have some areas on top of theirs. And I know that they're concentrating on a lot of areas that are like Mount Green, Peterson, where the infrastructure is something there is something there that they need to expand. So
maybe to Justin's point, then if it's shareable, can we also see the county plan?
It's on their website.
on their website, and if you go into on the very front page, it's got the Morgan County general plan draft, so you can see what's been going through on theirs. I think it's right
And
on the
there's
front
a
page.
draft plan map, which is the future land use. And that's great because you can zoom in next to Morgan City and see kind of what is proposed on the perimeter.
And then we currently don't have our draft on, but now that we had that presentation, we're getting towards doing open, public. You see, they're a little bit ahead from us. We ended up doing for the last year, we've been doing it in conjunction with the county. And then once it got to the presentation to the Planning Commission of county and city and public hearings, that's when we kind of split because we're 2 different entities. They've had one open house and then they had a public hearing last week. And so they're in where we're just starting. So, and this is where you guys get a lot of work.
Sounds good. Anything else on that? Otherwise, I'll turn it over to Jake. He's asked for 5 minutes. If we can sit for 5 minutes. When the big hand gets to the 5, we're done.
Okay, I'll keep it to 5. These are just some preliminary thoughts on the general plan as you're looking at it. In the introduction chapter, I suggest we bring more of at the end of the document is the implementation chapter. My recommendation is let's bring the to-do list up to the front. There should be a good executive summary in the first chapter, maybe a summary of the implementation steps. So that way you don't see what are your actions at the end of the document, because chances are most people won't make it to page 100 and see that. And regarding land use, this is something I had a discussion with Ty about, was that for the greater downtown mixed use, throwing out the idea of master plan community instead. A greater downtown mixed use, it's a really large area. And to me, a downtown should have higher density, higher intensity of uses, be very that's one of your more urban areas, and that's a very big zone on the map. However, master plan community would have more parks and trails. Maybe the housing intensity or units is a little bit higher, but is done in a master plan community way. And in a master plan community, you can still have commercial uses. In similar ideas, just a different approach and a different kind of makeup or DNA on that. So just think about the idea of maybe a master plan community. The benefit of a large property is that you can do a great master plan community. You can plan out the entire park system, the trails, the roads, things like that with a large property. And my understanding, that's the dairy property, which is rather big for Morgan. Okay, so you would have your zoning, your ordinance, and the ordinance may be similar to like a PUD where you describe the process and then you allow for the developer to come in and create this vision, this master plan, and work with the city to get that approved. So it's not necessary. That's one way to do it. The other way is to have a very prescriptive, like form-based code type plan, and then it could be approved and move forward. So there's different ways to do that. Daybreak in South Jordan, if you've been there, it's one of the best master plan communities in the state. Obviously, it wouldn't fit in Morgan City, and it's different. But some of the ideas of connected trails and open space and different types of housing is something to think about there. And then also I wanted to ask, I don't see, will there ever be a need to have more road crossings? You have your main freeway, interstate, and then there's an additional one going towards, is there another under road one? No.
There's one over by the fairgrounds that goes underneath railroad tracks. We have our main one on State Street as you come into town. Me personally, as the city streets department person, I see that eventually it would be great to have another rail crossing. I feel we're limited in Morgan City for a lot of manufacturing types of things due to access from the freeway. I think it maybe scares people that all there is that little tiny railroad bridge. I'm here to tell you I've had to get out and drop the air suspension on a trailer to squeak equipment under that bridge with 2 or 3 inches of spare, and to go loop through town up Commercial Street. It's not practical. So I definitely would think that it may not be for 100 years. Yeah, there definitely needs to be another access over those tracks or a completely rebuild of what we have.
Even on the recommendation, it outlined an additional lane each way. Well, that's great through the town, but you still have that main way to get in and out of the city. You have to go under the railroad. And I realize there's railroad jurisdiction there, but I agree, whether it's 5 years from now or 100 years from now, it needs to be planned for. There's a different way to get from the freeway to the city center, despite the obstacle of the railroad.
Yeah, I was just asking a question.
Yeah.
So should there be an overpass or interchange? And in the general plan, it could be the city should work with UDOT or initiate the process. You may not even say we want it. You may say we want to do that process to try to understand that, Brigham City has the Forest Street exit that goes over the railroad. And that's a game changer for them because it speeds it up and gives them a second access into their downtown. It's been really good for them.
So in thinking about this general plan and thinking about something like that, if you've followed the county in their interchange at Trappers Loop Road, that's 30 years out. This general plan's good for 10 to 20. We haven't even started dreaming about another freeway off ramp. Is it something you worry about in this general plan where they've been going for how long? It's still 30 years out. You're 2 or 3 general plans down the road before that may even become a dream.
If it's a good idea, it should be in there, even if it's longer than the
Okay.
plan. And that way, in 10 years or 15 years, when Morgan City picks this up again, they say, oh, that was in there before, we still like it, or we don't like it, or it's moved higher up in the priority. And when UDOT sees that it's in Morgan City's general plan, then maybe, because they want to work with local communities, that's part of what they say. And so having it in an adopted document goes a long way. So along those same lines, as you look at it, are there places there should be street connections, sidewalk connections, overpass, things like that? I didn't see a lot of detail in terms of, that's where the local knowledge comes in. The outside planners, they're not going to know where maybe certain streets you're saying, oh, those need to be fixed or connected. General plan's a great place to do that. So, and then on the river zone, I like that idea. I just think there needs to be more language about setbacks, maybe trails, making that more river compatible. And I see it being not commercialized, but maybe just as a recreation zone.
Yeah,
I
we
think-
originally had on there how it had just that the river. We had another zone right next to it that had where it was going to be commercial specific to use of the river, like fishing store or kayaking store, or things like that, or a restaurant that would have seating that was right next to that area. But we felt like we were having too many zones, so we took it out. But when we did, we didn't correct the language at all.
It is big hands past the 5.
Okay, I'm done.
Oops.
Done. So
Be
be curious.
Thank you for that. Appreciate it. And before wrapping, just want to thank, everyone that participated. It makes a huge difference when we get the dialogue and coming prepared. So thank you all, and thanks to our new folks to contribute as much as they did. That was fantastic. Could we get a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Thank you, Justin. This meeting is now adjourned.
Mr. Mayor, I got a question for you.